Welcome to the Bowtied Biotech podcast, where science meets business. If breakthrough biotech, bold innovations, and the business behind the science gets you excited, you're in the right place. Make sure to check us out on Substack, X, and LinkedIn at Bowtied Biotech for even more insights and updates. All right, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's dive right in.
You know, it's really interesting to me when you see these biotech companies right on the cusp of something big, like maybe they even get FDA approval for a drug, but then crickets. No big acquisition announcements. Big pharma's just like chilling on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic that's been, I think, increasingly noticeable.
Yeah.
This shift in how companies, particularly in the biotech space, are approaching the whole game of commercialization.
And it makes you wonder, why aren't those big players scooping up these promising companies, especially when they have something with blockbuster potential, like, let's say, a new drug for something like NASH?
Oh, NASH is a great example. Yeah, no, NASH is a perfect case study for this. Huge need for new treatments, and yet that traditional model of small biotech develops a drug, big pharma swoops in with a huge acquisition.
Huh?
It's not playing out the way it used to.
So help us understand that. What's driving this shift? Why the hesitation from big pharma?
Well, there are a lot of factors at play here, but one of the big ones is the financial reality of the biotech industry itself. Get this, 56%, a full 56% of publicly traded biotech companies have just 2 years or less of cash on hand.
Wow, that's cutting it pretty close, isn't it?
It really is. And you can imagine for a large pharmaceutical company looking at a potential acquisition, that kind of limited runway is a big red flag. It's a huge financial risk, maybe more than they're willing to take, even if the science behind a drug is promising.
So it's almost less about the potential of the drug and more about the financial stability of the company itself.
In many ways, yeah. It's a balancing act for sure. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While big pharma might be capping the brakes a little, we're actually seeing these smaller, more nimble biotech companies step up.
You're saying they're choosing to go it alone rather than waiting for a big payout.
Exactly. They're getting bolder, more strategic, more willing to take on the challenges of bringing a drug to market themselves. And the data really backs this up too. From 2017 to 2021, the percentage of new drug approvals that came from these smaller companies, it tripled.
Tripled. Okay, that's a huge jump. That really speaks to a change in the whole power dynamic of the industry. But it also seems a little counterintuitive, right? If these companies are having this independent success, why haven't they been acquired?
It's a great question. And to really understand it, I think we have to dive into some specific examples.
Yeah.
There's one company in particular, Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, that I think presents a really fascinating case study for all of this.
Okay, so Madrigal, what's the deal with them? What makes them stand out?
So they're the company behind this drug, resmetirom. It treats NASH, which is...
NASH, right.
Yeah, and it's a pretty nasty liver condition, actually. Non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And, you know, it's one of those things that can kind of sneak up on you. People might not even realize they have it for years. No symptoms or anything.
Silent.
Right, but it can be really serious. Cirrhosis, even liver failure.
So we're talking about a huge need for new treatments here.
Oh, absolutely. A huge unmet medical need. And here's the thing. Before resmetirom got approved, there was nothing. No FDA-approved therapy specifically for NASH. So you can imagine the market potential here.
Yeah, that's got to be a factor in all this, right? Like, why wouldn't big pharma jump at that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you've got Madrigal with this potential blockbuster drug for a serious disease. And they decide to go it alone.
Gutsy move. So how do they even approach that? What's their strategy when they're up against these giants in the pharmaceutical industry?
Okay, so put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're basically a startup, right? Limited cash. You're building everything from scratch. Sales, marketing, the whole 9 yards.
Talk about an uphill battle.
Right. And you're competing with companies that have unlimited resources and decades of experience. So Madrigal, they had to get creative. One of the smart things they did was, instead of trying to build this massive national sales force overnight, which, let's be real, they couldn't afford to do, they partnered with another company, a bigger one that already had a strong presence in hepatology.
So they're leveraging those existing relationships, those networks that are already there.
Exactly. It's way more efficient. Like, why build a whole railroad when you can just hop on an express train, right? And this way, they can get their drug in front of the right doctors, the ones who are actually treating NASH patients. And another thing they've been really smart about is key opinion leaders, KOLs. You know, those big names in liver disease, everyone in the field knows and respects.
Yeah, because especially with a new treatment, you need those voices, those trusted experts saying, hey, this works.
Totally. It's about credibility. When those KOLs talk, other doctors listen. And Madrigal has done a really good job of building those relationships, getting some big names to vouch for them. But it's not just about doctors either. They've been working with patient advocacy groups too.
Which makes sense, right? Build trust within the patient community, especially for a new treatment. People are always a little wary. NASH's isn't exactly like a household name. People might not be as familiar with it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it shows they're thinking long term. They're building that foundation of trust, getting people comfortable with the idea of resmetirom.
So they're thinking strategically, they're being resourceful, and you can't forget about the digital side of things either.
Oh, right. They've been really savvy with their marketing, using a lot of targeted online stuff.
Which, again, makes sense. Reach the right people directly, control the message, and it's way more cost-effective than, like, traditional advertising, which is important when you're a smaller company. So it sounds like they're really ticking all the boxes for, succeeding as an independent company. But it kind of brings us back to the original question. If they're doing all this right, why hasn't there been an acquisition?
Right. Well, we have to remember the whole history of NASH drug development, which, frankly, has been a little rough.
You mentioned that earlier about how there weren't any approved treatments before this.
Yeah, and what that means is a lot of failures. Like a lot of drugs come along, looked promising, and then nope. Disappointing results, safety concerns, you name it. So understandably, I think there's some hesitation from Big Pharma. Even now, like they've been burned before.
So it's kind of like they don't want to just take Madrigal's word for it. They need to see it to believe it.
Exactly, yeah. They want that cold, hard data. How's the drug going to perform out there in the real world, not just in a controlled trial setting?
Yeah.
Long-term effectiveness. How safe is it really, especially with a tricky condition like NASH?
Which has tripped up so many other companies.
Right, exactly. There's a lot at stake. And even for these huge companies, making the wrong call could be disastrous.
So Madrigal, they're kind of in this catch-22, aren't they? Pioneers in a way, but that comes with a whole other set of hurdles.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough spot to be in. And then you've got the whole price factor. I mean, since they got that FDA approval, Madrigal's valuation, it's gone way up. Which, makes sense, right?
They've got the golden ticket now.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also begs the question, what's Big Pharma actually willing to pay? Is it enough to make it worthwhile for Madrigal?
Especially given all that risk we talked about, yeah. It's a gamble, even with a drug that looks this good on paper.
Totally. And it's not like the landscape is standing still either. There are other players entering the NASH game now. You've got the GLP-1 drugs, for example, which were originally for diabetes.
Right. I've been hearing about those. Seems like they're finding all these added benefits, things they didn't even realize at first.
Exactly. And now some of them are showing promise for treating NASH too. So that throws another wrench in things.
Because now Big Pharma's thinking, well, hold on, do we go all in on Madrigal or...
Or do we wait and see how these GLP-1 drugs pan out?
Exactly.
And who knows what else might be coming down the pipeline.
It's like Madrigal's over here doing this delicate dance, trying to prove they've got the goods while their value's going up, and meanwhile, they've got to keep an eye on the competition. This is high-stakes stuff.
No doubt about it. But here's the thing. It ain't over till it's over, Just because an acquisition hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. There are definitely scenarios where Big Pharma could come knocking again, and maybe with a much bigger offer this time.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat here. What would it take? What could tip the scales?
Data, for one. As Madrigal accumulates more data on resmetirom out there in the real world, how well it's actually working, long-term effects, side effects, the whole picture. That's what Big Pharma wants to see.
It's like they're building their case brick by brick.
Yep. And the stronger that case gets, the more appealing Madrigal becomes. Yeah. And the other thing is, well, the market itself. Madrigal is a huge market, and it's only going to keep growing. If Madrigal really knocks it out of the park, if they capture a big chunk of that market share, prove they can hang, well, then they become much more attractive as an acquisition.
Because at that point, they're not just a promising company.
They're a major player. And no one wants to miss out on that, right? Plus, let's not forget the bigger picture here. We've got this whole trend of smaller biotech companies choosing independence, and sometimes, like in Madrigal's case, really making a go of it.
So it's almost like they're paving the way for others to do the same.
Exactly. And that could have huge implications. Think about it. How does this change the drug development game going forward? How do we get new treatments into the hands of patients who desperately need them? There are a lot of questions, but one thing's for sure. Madrigal's story, however it ends, it's a really interesting glimpse into the future of this industry.
It really makes you think, and that's what I love about these deep dives. We get to explore these complex issues, these really make you think situations. It's not just about one company or one drug. It's about the bigger picture of healthcare and innovation. So I guess we'll all be watching to see how the Madrigal story unfolds. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. Until next time.
You have been listening to the Bowtied Biotech podcast. Make sure to check us out on Substack, X, and LinkedIn at Bowtied Biotech for even more insights and updates. We appreciate your support and see you next week.